Welcome everybody to the Australian Embassy. Many familiar faces, some new ones. Thanks for making the effort to come and add to your connections. It's what it's all about in China, and Born Global, I guess, is a really good way of summing it up.
We're going to talk all about how millennials are driving innovation, what that means for businesses, and how Aussie-China collaboration can promote more innovation. So I'm going to start by sharing with you something that came out of a forum, a panel I moderated a few months ago at the World Internet Conference in Wuzhen, where a bunch of China's top venture capitalists were talking about who they would and would not invest in. And one guy, this is a guy who had, very early on put millions of dollars into Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent, and he said, I don't invest in any entrepreneur who is above 40. So I'm 43, and today we're talking all about millennials, but does that mean just age, or does it mean something else? So I'm going to explore this whole idea with Jeremy Balkin, who has that book. It's all about millennializing everything, which means what?
Millennialization of everything, it means, often when I speak, I say, who here's a millennial? And like 20% of the room puts the hand up, and I say, well, why doesn't everyone have their hand up? Because we're all millennials. And I'm here to tell you that being a millennial, yes, it's essentially the accepted definition of being born between 1980 and 2000, but actually the influence of millennials, how millennials have reshaped banking, financial services, travel, hospitality, dating, leisure, you name it, every major industry for everyone and everything has been disrupted. So what millennials want, millennial choices, preferences, and behaviors have disrupted and influenced and impacted every major industry for everyone and everything, and hence the millennialization of everything. Everyone take a book, put on the Chinese version of eBay if you want, or Alibaba later, or keep it, enjoy it. But when you got 415 million millennials in China alone, so there's more millennials in China than the entire population of the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, at GST. You think about that influence for the world. You think about the influence of China economically, politically, socially for the world any more than the US. You think about a third of the US population of millennials. In China, it's about a quarter. This is not a phenomenon that's going away anytime soon. Over the next decade, you'll see peak economic, cultural, social, and political influence of millennials across the world.
So, Cheng Lei, I want to bring it back to China. As Jeremy said, we have lots of millennials, but because of the massive changes that have taken place in China over the past 40 years, do you think the age gap is actually making a bigger difference? For somebody born in, for example, between 80 and 85, or if you're born in, from 85 to 89, you can have quite different mentalities. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. In the past, for traditional business like energy, mining, real estate, I think those people who are a little senior definitely has a lot of advantage. But right now, we're into an age where, big data, right now, FinTech, blockchain, and related cutting-edge technology are playing a much bigger role in especially developing country and economy. So I think, all of those senior people, they have not learned this at school. So I would definitely say the millennial has a much more advantage compared with older generation. And right now, I believe just now we're talking about the managing partner of GSR Ventures, Alan Zhu. Recently, his biggest investment, Alumnus, an O2O company just acquired by Alibaba for $9 billion. His founder just dropped out of its graduate course at Shanghai Jiao University.
A few months ago,
Yeah. So those people are really young. So those people have bold ideas and the ability to execute in a relatively fast speed. So I believe definitely millennials are playing a much bigger role.
Jeremy, some myths, or perhaps not myths, about millennials. On the negative side, they're lazy. On the positive side, they are more socially aware, they're more global, and they are all into cause marketing, or more easily targeted by cause marketing. What are some of the other things that people think of as millennials? How true are these myths?
Does fake news exist in China? Is that term?
Oh, big time.
There's a lot of fake news around millennials, and I think there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. There's truth to some. There's obviously fake news to others. I think part of it is because millennials are the most diverse generation in history. And I think there's sort of three distinct subsets of millennials based on, primarily based on age of birth. So if you think about, the last sort of 30 years of the world, we live in this kind of no labels, no judgment world. And of course, millennials have been the most labeled, stereotype judged generation in history. And unsurprisingly, only 8% of millennials, a lot of the data out of the US in particular, only 8% of millennials say, yeah, I'm really proud to be a millennial. Whereas 79% of baby boomers, because it's got such a great brand recognition, say, yeah, I'm really proud to be a baby boomer. So if you think about that, but also, so if you think about sort of those born between sort of the early 80s, grew up before the internet, before a mobile phone, knew what a landline was, knew what an encyclopedia is. Of course, the mid to late 80s, got very badly hit by the financial crisis, but got to use the internet growing up. And then the kids born in the late 90s and early 2000s, these younger millennials have only known a mobile first world. And yet that whole subset, that whole cohort of millennials are, you just throw the stereotype that millennials this or millennials that, but there's three distinct subsets based on experiences and influences. If you think about that, then you almost have to think about millennials in three different ways.
But do you think that's different, Jia Li, in China, where because the analog system wasn't that advanced or well developed, we've done that technology leapfrogging, so whether you're a millennial by age or not, you are in the mobile internet world anyway.
I think I have been to many of the Asian countries and European countries, and of course Australia and the United States. I think China is definitely leading every country in the FinTech manner, mobile payments. You can just swipe your Alipay or WeChat Pay, everything will be done well. The rest of the country are using basically credit cards. Some of them they don't even have credit cards. So I have been doing wealth management and robo-advisor and micro lending for quite a while. I would see that using big data technology to evaluate all of those personal profile could be a much more advantage. And also, I still think that other countries still have much more to learn from China, doing especially the minor innovations. United States are very good at doing groundbreaking research, and China are very good at doing minor, not only user experience design, but also how to make the products more viable to the mass population. And most of all, I think what is critical is building products that people really want. For example, right now we can use a WeChat group, and all of us can join and maybe keep future contact. This is just the traditional utilizing people's very I wouldn't say very groundbreaking, but very minor innovation to serve people's needs. That is very critical.
It's actually, today's a really historic day, not only because Ambassador Adams is hosting this amazing event, but this day in 1973 was the first day that a mobile phone call was ever made on a Motorola. It was like this big. It was like in The Wolf of Wall Street. It was literally that phone. And if you think about, one of the distinctions between the US and China in particular is China has just skipped a whole generation of telecommunications, gone directly to mobile, which is amazing. And again, another fun fact: 10 years ago, the iPhone was developed, right? November of 2007. And in November of 2007, the cover of Forbes magazine had a guy with one of those old school Nokia flip phones, and the headline said, "Can anyone challenge Nokia?" Does anyone have a Nokia today? Anyone ever heard of Nokia, the younger ones?
Very retro chic.
And look at what's happened in 10 years. And you look at the spread of entire ecosystems based on a mobile device, right? There's a $3 trillion app economy. You think about Uber and Didi and others, these companies only exist because of a mobile platform, and what have they done to disrupt entire industries? It's incredible.
So I'm curious as to what you do in your day-to-day job as Chief Innovation Officer for HSBC US Retail Banking that prevents HSBC from becoming a has-been.
I'm here on holiday. I mean, I think. So,
okay, let me rephrase.
Well, I mean, I'm a kid. I was born in. I'm a kid born in Sydney. My parents are from Africa. I work for a British bank with an Asian name. I live in America, and I'm married to, my wife is over there actually. She's a descendant of Syrian refugees. So if you think about my story, talk about born global, you think about international, well, that's the story of our bank. HSBC started in 1865, was the Amazon of its day. You think about the audacity of financing trade from, two British guys in the UK, in Hong Kong wanted to finance trade in the US. There wasn't even a BlackBerry in 1865. That's how far away it was. So, and you think about 153 years later, here we are. So innovation's in our DNA. So I'm just the custodian of the next wave of that for us as a firm, even though we haven't really done innovation for 150 years. But because our industry, banking hasn't done a lot. Just because we've got ATMs, which is a glorified cash vending machine, doesn't mean it's innovative.
ATM makers are all going bankrupt.
Well, I'm not going to go there. But what we do, we think about our customers. So fundamentally, you think about our customer. The most valuable thing we all share, is time. It's the thing you can sell, you can't buy. We're in an on-demand, mobile-driven world. Everything's, human attention spans now shorter than a goldfish. 6 seconds. Who's still awake? Anyone? So that, to me, is how we think about it. I want to give my customers back as much time as possible. So therefore, how do we re-engineer our bank to deliver that in a speedy, efficient, simpler, better, faster way? And that's the fundamental guiding premise. The confusion at the moment, right now, there's buzzwords for everything. Blockchain, AI, FinTech, this and that. You should really ask yourself, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And if one of those technologies can help you solve that problem, fine. But putting the technology first and then trying to work out how it fits into your strategy later is a mistake. So that's what we do.
So, Charlie, how do you engage with millennials in your startup companies?
So this is an area where one millennial can actually invest in other millennials' company equivalent of $100 million. This is actually an area of that I've experienced. Some of my friends in their early 20s, they sold their company for or that amount, or their investors. So I would say the millennial definitely, their learning curve is very steep, and right now they have either being investors or being entrepreneurs, they can do pretty good. And especially I would say in the cutting edge technology, just I mentioned, right now in the buzzword in the FinTech industry is blockchain. So right now you can see that in China, a lot of youngsters, they can build their company within 3 months with a market cap of 3 billion. That's such incredible. It's never been heard before. Of course, there are definitely some bubble in it, but sometimes bubble is good. It's attract other investors and other technologists to explore those fields. And of course, I would say that there are some, possibly there are some trouble with millennial entrepreneurship, this kind of mania. So a lot of people, maybe their ethics are not there, maybe they're being a little bit foolhardy and reckless. But I would say that's where the future of the society wins. We cannot always depend on the very, very old people who does not know the cutting edge technology to eventually decide where the society, especially in terms of technology progress, should go. So that's my 2 cents.
I want to ask you, Jeremy, how is the extent of, I guess, the US, whether government support or angel investor support for innovation?
There probably is a program, but I've never heard of it. I think the good thing about the US is the government tries to get out of the way of the private sector being trying to solve problems and solve challenges, so that the government can then focus on what it needs to do, and more important services to deliver than try to foster innovation. Because I think it's a very innovative society with the immigration. You think about this aspirational desire that's in the history of America and its constitution. So I think actually, if I could maybe take a tangent, the thing that I find frustrating going back to Australia now, and I was there last week on business, is the amount of times I heard somebody say to me, the government needs to, ... The government doesn't need to, okay? We need to. And people, in particular young people, need to stop asking for some silver bullet from some government agency. Just go and do it. Just do it. There's nothing stopping you. Yes, there's a lot of rules in Australia, maybe too many, but at the end of the day, we've got some of the smartest people in the world. We have a great economy, great regulatory system, capital's available. We have ideas that need to be taken on, and not only taken on in Australia, but overseas. And don't wait for some permission to do that. Okay, you don't need permission to have a great idea. So that's the frustration, actually. And I find in China, here on business and on holiday and so on, the entrepreneurship is palpable. It's everywhere, and no one here is asking for permission for that. And I think that's holding us back as a country. And I think it's great to see so many young Aussies here, because obviously you haven't asked for permission, you've just gone and done it. And
is scale not a problem?
I mean, it depends on the industry, what you're trying to achieve. I think Australia's biggest asset is if we sell ideas, human resources, right? So actually, then the scalability isn't a constraint. But I think, again, where the value is if maybe Australia might be too small a market for a particular vertical or product or idea, but that doesn't mean it's not absolutely applicable in a bigger market. And by the way, you don't have to take on America. You can take on a city. How many people in Beijing? 20 million? Size of Australia. by the way, if you want to come to China. So again, just because you can't get traction in Australia doesn't mean it's not a good idea, A, and B, there are plenty of other markets in the world. We live in a globalized world. The internet is our freedom, actually. It's not a constraint. You can be anywhere. So I want to see more Australian smart ideas taking on the world because we have the best ideas and the best people. But don't ask for permission. Just go and do it.
What do you think? Do you think the government in China has really helped facilitate that spirit of entrepreneurship? Or has it been more about idols like Jack Ma and Pony Ma?
The era of the largest market cap technology company, and Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, their era, they're really hard to get funding from venture capitalists. But right now, I just saw data online. Zhong Guancun, right now the venture capitalists and private equity guys, they have 200,000 those investors, and their asset under management to invest in cutting-edge technology company in the relatively growth stage or mature company is, I believe, it's 1.4 trillion Australian dollars. So you can imagine the magnitude and the money they pour in to foster this kind of innovation. And also, Zhong Guancun, they try to copy the Silicon Valley model. Silicon Valley Bank. They have Zhong Guancun Bank. Also, the government. I believe it's several years ago. Premier Li Keqiang really promote this kind of everybody can be their entrepreneur. This kind of mentality really fits the millennials. In the past, people always want to study business law and go working in big corporations, especially I believe like Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, and big four banks similar like in China. That's what probably if I was born like 10 years ago, that's what I would go to. But right now, everybody believe they can have desire to start their own company, be their own boss. That's definitely fit their character, and they believe even if they fail, they can start right off again because the ecosystem support them. I believe that is very important for Australia, maybe to learn from China and the United States in that regard.
I want to bring it back to millennials and how businesses, traditional businesses, for example, can better engage with millennials to reach them, to connect with them, to retain them as customers.
Well, let's talk about communication, right, for the first thing. So I think I call it communicating to millennials is as easy as ABCD. So, authenticity, brevity, context, and digital, right? You have to be able to condense the message into 140, or now it's 280 characters on Twitter. So I think ABCD, authenticity, brevity, context, digital. And by the way, that's not only to millennials, that's just the millennialization of communications. It's the same for everybody now. So that's the first thing. So whether that's selling a product, motivating your employee base or your customer base or your voters or shareholders, the same principle applies. I think that the challenge is, there's a lot. One of the myths about millennials is that millennials are all about social impact and all that stuff, and yeah, that's clearly a part of it. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to motivate, retain, and attract millennial talent in your company is just to pay them fairly. That's the number one thing. So again, coming back to dollars and cents. But I think if you look at we talked before about education. Okay, so in China, millennials, about a quarter of millennials, so 25% of millennials have a university degree versus say 3% of the rest of the population. So you think about the value of that globally, connective understanding how the world works, international networks, how valuable that is, right? You think about in the US, by 2025, 3/4 of the workforce will be millennials. Okay, what's the country going to look like with a millennial president or prime minister, or a bank with a millennial CEO? So how will these massive organs of power operate differently with different experiences based on leadership who have different experiences and better use of technology, better understanding the world? I think it's a really positive thing actually, and I think it'll be really exciting over the decades ahead.
Is it true that they're more philanthropic?
In the US, actually, millennials, when they look at the value of time, so volunteer hours are the most philanthropic, but in terms of value of time, right? So giving up hours to donate their time to volunteer for a cause or an internship or something that means something to them. But according to actual dollars given, it's obviously the baby boomer generation.
Absolutely.
Although you're going to see over the next 20 years a $40 trillion wealth transfer, 40 trillion with a T, like half of world GDP from one generation to the next. So that's going to be also really exciting to see how there's a lot of evidence about how millennial inheritors or the wealth transfer, how they want to invest their money and put more impact. Interesting to see.
Just want to ask both of you, is it true that, say, millennials in the US tend to be more careful with the money because of the global financial crisis, and millennials in China are probably more likely to, say, even buy an iPhone on credit, which is unheard of for the previous generation?
China has the largest saving rate in the world, approximately 70%, I believe. So once they have that amount of money, and because the millennials, they live in a different age from their forebears, probably because in their father's age, China is still a developed country with approximately GDP per capita annually, I don't know, at least it's below 5,000 US dollars. So everything has to become really living a relatively reserved and frugal lifestyle. But right now, I think it's totally different because their parents, they want to give the best to their children, best education. They even provide the first down payment or for their first housing in this expensive city like in Beijing. So they feel like there is no life pressure. Everything is there for the taken. So maybe they're, that's what people call right now. There is opportunity for this consumerism upgrade. So I would definitely say. But in terms of philanthropic issues, I believe a millennial, they want to probably do it in a different way. For example, the founder of the Google, those guys, they're more interested in giving their money to much more fancier technological guys like Elon Musk, maybe to help him to help human race become multi-planetary species instead of just giving money to WTO, WHO. I believe those are different kinds of mindset.
I think Chinese entrepreneurs are going the same way, giving to universities and Elon Musk.
It's interesting. I think 2/3 of consumption is millennial spending in the US, in China. 2/3, so 66%. In the US, millennial spending is compounding at 15% per year versus non-millennial spending, which is about inflation. What I think unites both populations, though, is what they're spending it on, and it's experiences. It's experiences, not things. It's travel, it's hospitality, it's dining, which is different from the older generations who are accumulating stuff. By the way, Australia is the best experience in the world. Come and travel there, come and spend money there, and if you want to eventually set up a company and invest, it's even better. But I think it's the experience question. That's the real thing that unites both.
Experiential spending.
Absolutely. Well, experiences generally. Experiences, not things. So there's actually a lot that millennials and every other generation actually have in common. The key difference, though, that drives behavior or that have shaped behavior is really two things. It's technology and trust. So if you think about in the West, obviously the role of the financial crisis, the role of 9/11, these are formative trust experiences that actually shaped a mistrust of formal institutions, particularly for millennials across the US, Australia, Canada, the Western world. I think China, the trust was actually, instead of distrust of institutions, it's actually trust of the West. So it's actually more integrated and connected. That's the different side of the trust piece. I think it's a really positive thing from a Chinese perspective. Better connected with the world, more trust of their international peers. But then the technology piece. So we talked about the last 10 years of the iPhone, right? You think about how formative the smartphone has been for particularly millennials in shaping their lives. So when you take the two meteors of like trust and technology, right, and when they collide, they have this phenomenal wave of innovation. That's what every company in the world right now, governments are going, holy shit, what do we do about innovation? We better be re-engineering our systems, our platforms, our entire operations to be relevant for today, let alone for tomorrow. But it's the trust and technology piece. Those two factors are the most poignant influences of millennials across the world. Okay. The other thing you asked about China and just remind me the second part. Yeah, so that's actually sorry, I couldn't remember the last part. That's exactly right. So one thing that actually makes millennials different from other generations is there's a globally there's a commonality, okay, between proficiency with technology or the digital native piece. So I talk about technology, and then the trust piece, okay. In the West, it was distrust of institutions. In China, it's actually trust of their trust of the world, the outside. But the two pieces of trust and technology essentially are behavioral influences of millennials around the world, and the connectivity piece with technology, so social media, et cetera, have created this global population where it's never been connected like that before. So there are 2 billion people on Facebook, right? You think about the WeChat, the social, the Alipay, Twitter, Google, etc. These technology platforms really have become so ubiquitous in the last decade as connecting people around the world, driven by millennials who want to talk to each other, who know what
Could that trust in major social media organizations start to crumble as
Absolutely.
well in the wake of
Absolutely. Trust takes years to accrue, and you can destroy it in seconds. And I think that technology companies, I can't speak for China, but certainly for the US, are going through this realization that you have to explain your reason for being to the communities you serve, your customers. You can't just take it for granted that everyone's just going to blindly follow what it is you do. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I think, if anything, the technology companies, if I was to make a prediction in the US, over the coming years, will probably be going through their existential moment like financial services did in 2008, and having to re-explain, justify its value to society, which was a good thing. It was important because it hadn't happened for 80 years. And I think the technology companies are going to have to go through that. And we're going to continue to see these ethical failures, sadly. But I think it's important that it goes through that transition.
And what about in China, where social media companies are subject to government control anyway?
Yeah, I would argue that the biggest difference between millennial in Australia and China is peer pressure, because I understand in China, the largest country, probably compared to the United States, has its own, I would call, self-sufficient ecosystem in terms of mobile internet. But Australia, probably everybody was using Google and using different kinds of apps and technology services provided by companies in Silicon Valley and the rest. So in China, for example, if you look at the investment and people and entrepreneurship activities people are doing each year, they kind of like have a theme. For example, like in 2014, maybe it's P2P, peer-to-peer lending. In 2015, it's software as a service. And in 2016 and 2017, it's blockchain. Yeah. So everybody, a lot of people, hundreds of entrepreneurs, they like to spend their time and effort in it. And investor, they think this is where the money is, so they would like to back them. But in Australia, maybe people, I would say, judging by character, people are much more happy and conceited because they live in a prosperous country, the lucky country. Yeah, so they have nothing to worry about. So they're much more interested in pursue their own individual interest. So that's probably the huge difference. In China, people tend to a little bit think alike, to go to dig the money.
So they can live in the lucky country.
Yeah. So but in Australia, people, they don't have too much to worry about, but maybe they should learn from each other a little bit.
Okay, more questions?
And so what type of company, what kind of industry is really in? For example, if it's in traditional, like real estate, energy, or cross-border trade, those kind of traditional industry, maybe they can use technology, for example, using software, using CRM, different kinds of, to increase its efficiency, and maybe doing some revamp in the corporate governance perspective. But if he's really looking into tapping into new opportunities, for example, like big data, blockchain, FinTech, artificial intelligence, mobile internet, or maybe the next generation, generation devices like Oculus, Vive, competing with the most technological advanced countries and firms in the world, they really need to hire enough talents. I mean, people eventually, at the end of the day, people are the key. If you have enough graduates from the most prestigious university in the world, Harvard, Stanford, ANU, UNSW, Tsinghua, and Beida. Eventually, if you can have all of this, for example, computer science, mathematics, finance guys, to go work for a firm, I mean, eventually, it's not going to end too bad. But if you are looking into revamp the traditional technology, maybe just they can utilize your experience. Disrupt the traditional business is really hard. But tapping into new opportunities, I would say, is even harder. Yeah.
We've had everything answered from the Chinese perspective. The only thing I would say, maybe to add, albeit from a different lens, is to say we live in a competitive world. I think competition is a great thing. I think humans inherently have an aspirational desire. It's why humans got out of the cave, to chase the light. If you think about human evolution and stuff. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that businesses and startups want to compete, and unfortunately, only the winners will survive. But the lessons learned along the way is good for the economy. It's good for society. It's good for entrepreneurs. It's good for people. Though I would say from an Australian perspective, we love young athletes to go and take on the world in the sporting field and the Olympics and to win and hopefully win the right way, no sandpaper or anything. But I think what we need to also do is translate that great support for sort of athletes who are entrepreneurs to business entrepreneurs, to startups. That's the piece that's missing. And I hope in the coming years ahead with this wave of innovation, this community and government support in Australia, is we're going to translate that support for Australian athlete entrepreneurs to business entrepreneurs, young people to go and take on the world with their ideas, have the conditions to be successful and go win that gold medal, but in a business environment. I think that's the missing piece. That's what we can learn from China. That's what we can learn from the US. But I think it's really, really exciting. And I congratulate everyone who's here today to go and do that.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and thank you for being a great audience. Hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you.